Welcome to Economics Happy Hour. My name's Matt,
And my name is Jadrian.
and we are thrilled to have you with us on May 23rd, May 13th when we're recording it, but it's mid-May, and Jadrian's enjoying his first day of summer vacation. And I put it in quotes if you're watching the screen here, because it was still a working day, but feel good to get everything wrapped up with the semester.
It feels great to have everything, yes, the semester stuff done, right? Grades are done, evaluations kind of briefly looked through. I'll look at those over the summer in more depth. But yeah, everything's kind of closed out and done. Like that part of the semester's done. And so now today, and so the reason Matt is joking about my first day off, is I have spent the entire day working, catching up basically on things that I wasn't doing over the past month that were not related to teaching. So now I'm
Yeah.
kind of digging back into research, getting stuff done, and trying to get ready for C-Tree coming
Yeah, and
up.
I hope I'm not saying anything that should be private, but some time on IRB regulations, which
Mhm.
institutional review boards for research, which if you haven't had the pleasure of filling out an IRB application before, you know,
It is
my
long.
first toast will be to those lucky ones who have not
This
had to
is
deal with it.
I'll give you some insight for those of you who have never had to fill one of these out. The easy way is you kind of tell them your idea and they may fast track it and say, yeah, you're good. If they would like more information, they will ask you to submit, if I can scroll to the bottom of this page, a 28-page document that explains every single
Horrible.
step of what you're going to do, how you're going to interact with people, how you're not going to interact with people, how you're going to recruit people, how you're not going to recruit people.
No,
It's long.
it's
And I think the
painful.
worst part about it, and I'm going to say worse, these exist for a really good reason. But I'm going to say the worst part about it in the sense that I don't do medical research. I'm not doing psychology research. I'm not playing around with prescription drugs. I'm not like I'm not doing anything dangerous. And a lot of
Yeah.
times, this process is really there for people who are doing things that
Yep.
could really harm individuals. I'm an economist. I'm not. I'm surveying students about things that they are doing.
No, I agree.
No,
I've thought
no
the
imminent
same.
harm.
I've thought the same on some of them. We still, our commencement, by the time people listen, we will have had commencement at Susquehanna, but ours is upcoming this Saturday. So semester is still ongoing here.
It's about. I love commencement. It's like one of my favorite things. Everybody is so happy.
Yeah.
Getting to see parents happy. I love graduation time.
So most recent, last year, they made a change at Susquehanna where instead of the provost reading all the names, and we're a small school, so it's about,
Mhm.
450 to 500 names, and the provost would read them all. They had the deans of the school. And for a long time, I thought, oh my gosh, I would hate to be the provost to read those names. And I still think I would hate to read 500, but I loved reading the names last year. That was
Mhm.
so, it was like a true privilege because I know a fair number of these students when they graduate. I mean, maybe 150 business students. I'll know some quite well, and then a lot of others I'll know a little bit from, passing in the hall or hearing about their job or their internship. So it's really pretty fun. I'm looking forward to doing that again.
I One of my favorite things since coming to Virginia Tech, I didn't get to do this at Penn State. It has been so much fun here, and I'm so happy my department chair has let me do it. We graduate by college,
Yep,
and so during the college ceremony, it is basically the deans and the department chairs. But my department chair's on sabbatical, and last year he was gone, so I've gotten to do it twice in a row. Basically, I get to stand up there with the dean, and the students walk across the stage, shake the dean's hand, shake my hand, and then we all take a
that's
picture
pretty cool.
together. And I love it because like I know they're undergrads, right? I know these students really well.
Yep.
And so it's so cool to just be able to see them walk across the stage and shake their hand because they've either, even though it's only been my second year, I've gotten to teach some juniors and seniors. And so
Yeah.
I actually knew, man, this is only my second year. I would say I probably knew about a third of the ones who walked across the stage, just from the two classes I've taught so far. So it was really cool to get to interact with them. And so I'm very excited. If I hope I think he'll let me keep doing it. I'm really
Yeah.
excited for like my first year class where I teach all the first year students that like I'm gonna know almost all of them.
You'll know them all. That's really cool. That's
Yeah.
really cool. What is your beverage of choice today?
Oh, I'm working through the fridge. I
Okay.
am finishing up my six pack of Joseph Brau Hefeweizens, the Trader Joe's Hefeweizens. I have finally poured the sixth Hefeweizen. So that part is knocked out. I have knocked out the summer shandies. I've knocked out my porch rockers. I've knocked out a bunch of six packs. The weather's been really nice over the past couple weeks. So making some dents in the fridge.
Fantastic, fantastic. And I'm having a beer I have never had before, but it's been a little bit more than a week since Cinco de Mayo.
Oh,
So
nice.
Mas Lima Cerveza
I
from Oscar
love,
Blues Brewery.
I
Uh,
love, I already know that's going to be a good one. I feel like
Lager with lime and salt. So
that is a good way to spend the summer.
this is looking forward to this. It seems like a fitting drink on a pretty nice day. So
Cheers, Matt. We'll get
yeah,
started.
cheers. So last year in the summer, we came up with an idea to do a top econ books, and then we also provided a bunch of recommendations. And that episode was very, very long. But the idea of going through some books that we like, we still think that's a good idea. We're not going to go through quite as big of a list. But our thoughts for today were to highlight maybe a couple of different books.
Mhm.
I have at least one econ related book and one non-econ related book that our economics educators and anybody else listening might enjoy. So I'll give you the
And they're
first track.
not gonna they're not gonna be the same as last year, right? You're not
These are
gonna
not the
duplicate.
same. The
Okay.
three that I am going to be putting out there have all come out since last year. So none of
Ooh.
these three, my three, are all brand new. They couldn't. I think they're maybe one of them was just before, but my three are all new. I don't know if that's the case on yours. We haven't checked what we're doing. I'll let you go first, and of course you're going to name one of mine. What should
Am I really?
No, I don't think so. But
Okay. I was gonna
uh,
say, I think all of them, I at least the ones I just clicked on really quickly all came out in 2023. So they came out last year, and I've read them since our last episode.
okay.
Um,
So I'll be. This will be risky then, but I will let you go first to take one because there's a chance we're going to talk about the same thing.
Now you got me very curious now. Okay, so just as a back note, Matt and I like to read. We prefer nonfiction. Matt reads some fiction every now and then. I used to read like 52 books a year. The past year or two, I have throttled way down. My
You're
numbers have got. It's still reading more, I think, than what most people read, but like, um,
Yeah,
throttled way
I'm
back.
certain if you look at the average, with the average, you're reading more than the average person for sure. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think
I think the average person reads like a book a year. I think that's
yeah,
according to Pew. I think it's
might be a couple. I think they're starting versus finish, but it's single digits for sure. And the yeah, you're a victim of your Monday morning economist success, I think. Which life is trade-offs. So
I'll take it.
yeah,
So Matt, do you want to start with a econ book or a non-econ book?
I'm flexible.
Ooh, okay. This is
Getting
okay.
all of
I'm gonna pick an econ. I'm gonna pick
okay,
econ then as my first
okay,
choice. So the book I'm gonna recommend came out January 1st, 2023. I didn't read it till last summer, so it didn't make it to our list. However, since Matt mentioned my newsletter, it was my top choice in my December newsletter. So at the end of every year on my newsletter, I talk about my favorite books from the year. I'm going to recommend that. So Matt and I tried to look at this as if we were going to recommend a book for you to read over summer break, what book would we recommend, either econ or not econ? And my answer is Eric Ongner's How Economics Can Save the World: Simple Ideas to Solve Our Biggest Problems. So it is, in my opinion, a really good book that looks at sort of I would say like sort of big world issues. I think Matt and I are both economists, so we sort of we're buried in this idea that like yes, economics can solve really big issues like inequality, homelessness, discrimination. Like economics can
yeah,
fix a lot of things, and I don't think a lot of people think like that. I think you have to sort of be in economics to really appreciate that. But I think Ogner's book does a really, really good job of doing that, where he talks about a lot of like development economist stuff. He talks about our favorite topic, the matching markets of kidney donation. So he summarizes a lot of the work there. He does, I think, a really good job of sort of saying like how have economists stepped into spaces to help people solve these issues that weren't being solved before. So as an econ book, that's my number one choice. I read it last year, absolutely loved it. I think it's a very accessible book in my opinion. It's written sort of for a broad audience, and the
sure.
author is a behavioral economist. So he writes a lot of like he has a really famous textbook for behavioral economics that we use. That I have not read his behavioral economics textbook, but I know it's very popular with our students.
That's fascinating. I have not read it. I do recall that now that you said it, I couldn't have told you what you had listed. Now that you mentioned it, though, I do remember you listing that, and I might have to add that to the queue, which is sadly getting way too long. But summer's coming, and it's a good opportunity. So I'm excited that you've given me this one. Last summer, I there were a couple different books that you recommended that I hadn't read, and I found value in them. So the 50 Inventions That Shaped the Modern Economy and Rockonomics. I hadn't read either. I think you'd read
Oh,
both. And
Rockonomics, I thought was really good.
yeah,
Yeah.
I thought both of those were very good, and so I'm excited to add this to my list. So my econ one is very, very different than what you'd had. Um, and it's an biography that I think tells an incredibly good story about economic history through the 1900s. And the title is simply Milton Friedman. It's
Okay.
by Jennifer Burns, who is at Stanford, a historian. And I'm a pretty big Friedman fan in general, so it was kind of interesting to me to hear this. But I think it's a pretty fair take. She's not. I don't know that any most historians would not call themselves like a fanboy or fangirl by any means, but I think it's a pretty nuanced approach. But it is absolutely fascinating to me, and I think to those who study economics, the evolution of his time in the 1900s, and just to hear about what were the big economic debates at the time,
Yeah.
what were people saying, what has perhaps become more in fashion, what's become less in fashion. And in terms of just economic history, and speaking of how economics can save the world, right? We're at about the 50-year mark where we don't have a draft in this country. Like Milton Friedman was on that committee along
Hmm.
with other economists. And it's absolutely, to me, just fascinating. I enjoy biographies, and it goes through childhood as well. I
Oh,
enjoy
interesting.
finding out how did some of these people who really became some of the most exceptional and well-known people in their discipline, how what was their childhood like? I mean, how is it different than everybody else? And I thought that was fascinating. But from views on inflation, unemployment, the draft, free markets, it's a pretty fascinating look through history. There's interactions with a lot of other economists like Tobin and Samuelson, and
Hmm.
it's if you like economics and you like history, I think you would enjoy the book.
Is there another? So I'm trying to think through other econ history ones. So I'm going to recommend I'm a follow up on a recommendation off of this one. I was furiously typing stuff in Goodreads because I want to make sure I add these to my list. Is there another like Friedman biography that somebody would read? I don't think I've. So where I'm going with this is I know of biographies that look at all of the famous histories of economic thought, but
Yep.
I don't know of any that sort of look at an individual person, like for the entire book. And so I'll just throw it out here while you think about it. I was going to recommend Linda Yu's book, which is called, if I can find the tab, I have so many tabs open now. What Would the Great Economist Do? How 12 Brilliant Minds Would Solve Today's Biggest Problems. Have you heard of that book?
I've heard of that book.
Okay, it came out in 2018. I read it. I'm gonna maybe spoil, or maybe people will dislike me after I say this. I am not a fan of worldly philosophers.
Okay.
I don't get it. I read it. It is an incredibly popular book for history of economic thought, and I hear so many people talk about how amazing that book was. I painstakingly got through it, and I would have quit if so many people I knew hadn't said like that was the best book they've ever read. So I just kept waiting. I was like, where is the good part of this? But Linda, I don't know if I'm saying her name right, but Linda Yue wrote "What Would the Greatest Economist Do?" and it looks at it's essentially kind of the same idea. It's 12 different sort of economic philosophers from Adam Smith, Keynes, Friedman, Marx, things like that. And she basically goes through like and basically introduces the person, gives a little bit of a biography of each person, and then talks about like how that individual would sort of look at some sort of problem like
Yeah,
unemployment or inflation, things like that. So I think that's as a follow up. If you don't want to read an entire book about Milton Friedman,
sure.
but you do want to read about sort of history of economic thought, I would recommend this one, not Worldly Philosophers. But is there a book? Are there books
There
about
was
economists that?
there was something else on Milton Friedman called Milton Friedman: An Economic Debate in the United States. That's 2 volumes, and it goes from 32 to 72 in total. This book spans from his childhood all
Yeah,
the way through to his death, basically.
that's
Um,
interesting.
and so it's really, I think, the definitive biography
Hmm.
on Friedman. So if you like Milton Friedman, you're going to love the book, I think. There's just too much in it. If you're, don't know much about Friedman or know a little or are indifferent, maybe even, have a negative initial impression, I still think you'd like a lot of it just for the sheer what you learn about as we weave through the 70s and the 60s, 70s, and just kind of some of the stuff when the AEA meetings, him going up there and writing out these papers with these new theories, and just everybody is saying how horrible it is. And a few years later, though, people kind of buying into what was said. So I found that fascinating. I've might add some of those other books though as well to the
Is there
list.
a book? So I have one in my mind, but I'm gonna make sure I ask you first just to be sure. Is there a book that do we have biographies of economists? Like, is that a genre that I'm not aware of? Like, I'm thinking, yeah, there's probably an Adam Smith one, but like not. I'm gonna say not a popular one because I've never heard of it. I would assume there's an Adam Smith. There's maybe a Karl Marx. I'm thinking, 1800s, 1700s people, maybe. But like, he has to be perhaps
Yeah,
the young. I'm gonna say youngest, just in the sense, the most recent economist who would have a biography that is
that's
popularly written.
probably true. I just searched and I thought the other person in the 20th century who I think might have had one would have been John Maynard Keynes, and there indeed is
Okay.
one
So
called
I
The
was thinking
Price
John
of
Nash because
Peace.
A Beautiful Mind is a biography. Like it was based
That's
on a
true.
book and then
Nash
turned into
had
a
one.
movie.
Yeah,
Some people will argue that he's a mathematician, not an economist, but um, that if anything, that
adjacent
might be
enough.
the because that might be the most popular biography of an economist, only
Sure,
because it turned into a movie that won a Best
correct.
Picture and stuff. But okay, so
I
Keynes
don't
has
think it's
one.
it's certainly not a when you're going into the local Barnes and Noble,
There's not a
biographies of
category.
economists is not yet a full section. So,
Yeah.
or even row, or maybe even spot on the shelf for most of the time. But so so we've hit a couple econ books
Hmm.
here. I'll have a bonus book or two later, but so you had a fiction book as
I do.
well that,
I don't know. I'm gonna have to check for fiction.
or
I'm gonna give
maybe
you
a
another
non-economics book
a
at least.
non-economics nonfiction one. But before I
Okay.
tell you that, I do have some information for you on the average number of books that people read. So
Okay.
I was furiously Googling this to find out so we could talk about it. This is from a Gallup poll in 2022, sadly titled "Americans Are Reading Fewer Books Than in the Past." And it does ask them during the past year about how many books did you read, either all or part of the way through.
Yeah.
So the average number of books, based on a survey, Matt, you want to give it a guess
I
of
I
Gallup
think I might have
interview?
seen it and yet I still don't remember. So do you want me to give the started or the finished?
I have in front of me either all or part of the way.
So they at least started the book. I'll
Yeah,
guess the average, I think might have been the median, maybe started 6 books.
the average was 12.
12. Okay.
Yeah, I don't have the breakdown of each one, but it does say 40% of people read between 1 and 5 books. So I was the median, right? When you were actually saying the median, my guess is the median is probably 6. And then the average messes up because of people like us.
Could be. So um I
All right.
had I remember seeing that.
Mhm.
The one thing I was a little surprised at is I thought the median might literally be 1 book. So I was actually
Yeah.
pleasantly surprised. Oh, okay, well
Well,
it's starting,
yeah,
but
I remember this from a Pew survey that always I'm gonna say always surprised me. Like I still, and even I'll say it here, I still think it surprises me. They asked basically, they surveyed people and said, "Have you read a book this year?" And 75% of adults said that they have read at least a book or an ebook or listened to it. They gave them the option, a physical book, an ebook, or an audiobook. 75% of people said yes, they have done one of those things. And to me, that was always shocking that a quarter of people haven't done any of it. I sort of, even when you break it down by like age, to me it was really surprising
Sure.
that it was that high. And even I think, when you take sort of the stereotypical group where you say, "Oh, okay, well, what old people read," right? Like that. I think there's some stereotypes about readers, but like,
Yep.
and actually, it's younger people who read at least some sort of book. People 65 and older, it's 40 or 32% don't do any of it. They don't do a book,
Wow.
an ebook, or an audiobook.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's those sorts of things I think that are, I even when I look at the data, I'm like, you're not even like opening a book. But I digress. I like to read. So I know I'm not part of the group. All right, Matt, I have two for you. And this is gonna be tough. I'm gonna share if I'll give you
Hello.
my recommendation for one that I think you would really enjoy, and I think a lot of our listeners would really enjoy, but I'm gonna frame it in the sense that I would not recommend it if you could only read one book this summer that's a non-fiction, non-econ book. I would recommend something else.
Okay.
Welcome back, Matt. Welcome to Economics Happy Hour.
Yeah,
Uh,
no kidding. The recording
it
picked right back up.
it
So
did. So it
on
did say
mine,
it
I'm
was.
seeing, I don't know if I assume this was mine since my thing restarted and I just
It said
switched
it was
things.
recording the entire time. The recording thing never turned off. Um,
But you just froze on the screen and everything seemed to work. And then I switched my internet. Who knows? So
it's
uh,
okay. Well, you'll find out when you go back to review this.
I'm excited. I'm
I talked
excited
the
to,
entire time you were gone. I was like,
yeah.
Matt's gone. I'm the captain now. This is my
Yeah.
show.
Yep. Uh, but yeah, so it is the numbers who read. It is a little bit surprising, although I find one effect of being on a cruise ship is I don't get internet. And
Yep.
then I read so much more, which makes me realize how many articles I read just when I wake up in the morning. I'll put something on in the news. And
Hmm.
I would love to have the habit where I instead read 20 pages of a book.
Yeah.
And I know that you used to at least do that. That was regular. I don't know how regular it is
I'm
anymore.
getting I'm getting better. It's
Yeah.
not great. It's still been really bad. I mean, I'll say I'm getting better, but not worse. So Matt, I think maybe given what you just picked up on, where we left off a second ago, I said that I had two nonfiction, non-econ books that I'm going to recommend that I'll talk about.
Okay.
However, I'm only going to recommend one to listeners as one that I think they should
Okay.
that's the one that they should read this summer if they had to pick one.
Okay.
So
So
hopefully
you
that
have
makes
two of them
I
that
have
you're gonna
two mostly
are
because
they
I
and
just want to.
they're both 2023?
Yes, I think so. Let me see. Yes, this one is 2023, and surprisingly, I'm trying to find. I think my Goodreads is not sorted the way that I was expecting it to. I just finished this other one, and it's not popping up here in my list. The other one is
Okay.
relatively new. I think it's also 2023.
Okay.
Um,
I
but there
have
were
I have two different ones that are 2023. Curious if either of these are yours as
Okay.
well.
So I went back and looked. Actually, one of them is 2022. So I have
Okay.
2022 and one's a 2023. So the one that Matt I will recommend to you, but not to our listeners, but don't worry, listeners, I'll still tell you about it. It's just such a niche book. It is called The Year That Broke America. Have you seen
Okay.
this?
I haven't seen this.
It is about the year 2000. Like that's the entire book. So it is about the Gore versus Bush election. It is about Donald Trump running for president the first time. It's about the Elian Gonzalez,
Yeah,
uh, the immigration controversy in Miami. It's about the 9/11 terrorists getting ready for 9/11. It's fascinating, but only
sure.
because I remember the year 2000. I was younger, but like I
Yeah.
remember a lot of the stuff going on. And so that's what made it super interesting and being able to connect them together.
Yeah,
However, I think you really need to be interested in those sorts of things in
sure.
order to, I think, really enjoy it. So,
I'll go the flip side from what you did before on the
okay.
broader book. There was a book, and I don't know the release date. I believe it's simply called the 1990s.
Hmm.
and it's like a review of the 90s, but the authors kind of argue, okay, decades officially have a start and an end date, but he basically says the 90s officially ended on 9/11. So it would
Okay.
contain um that, but it also contains a lot from the 1990s
Do you
as
remember what it was
well.
called?
I think it's literally the 90s or the
Mm.
1990s. I can
Mm.
find it for you here in a moment.
Okay, I might need you to search for me because I'm getting a lot of other options there. So give me
Yeah.
one of your. I'll say
Okay, so I have
I'm deferring my recommendation.
okay. The I have a nonfiction book that I have finished and a nonfiction book that I've started, both from 2023. I could recommend the one I finished for sure, and that's Elon Musk's biography by Walter Isaacson. I mean, this is just it reads like fiction because he's such a crazy person.
Oh,
But
so this is not the Ashley Vance one. I say he has two biographies.
this is
You're doing Walter Isaacson's.
I believe it's Walter
Okay.
Isaacson, the same one who did Steve Jobs,
Okay. I'm
and
marking it.
and same one who did Albert Einstein. It's absolutely a fascinating read. And once again, how does somebody grow up to be the richest person in the world? At least that for some moment of time. I don't know that. I don't
Hmm.
think he's still at that spot. But there's a lot there that ties to econ and business and innovation, and it's very long. He's not always a good human being, and but it's very fascinating to listen through to see what makes somebody kind of one of the no matter what way you look at it, one of the most important people of this
Hmm.
century so far in terms of just the sheer innovation that's been pushed through by the products. And yeah, it's a long biography, but it does it reads it's like fiction. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just fascinating. And there will be things in there that are pretty recent, like the Twitter takeover. And boy,
Hmm.
um, some of the stuff you might have heard it in the news and you're like, it can't really be like that, right? Yeah, yeah. Some of it was pretty much just like that. So that's a not econ nonfiction that I guess I
Okay.
could throw out there as a recommendation. Now I'm
I
looking through
I've
my
added
list.
it. I've added it to my list. I listened to his other biography. He came out, well, he didn't come out with it. Somebody came out with it in 2018, and I had
Okay.
listened to that one. I remember that one actually as an audiobook. But I've added this new one on here. All right, let me give you my actual recommendation for this summer. It's gonna be the weirdest book. I can't wait to tell you about it. I was blown away with this book.
Okay.
I
I'm excited.
still think about the stuff that's in this book. It is called Ice. I think we talked about this. Ice, from
Yes.
mixed drinks to skating rinks, a cool history of a hot commodity. Absolutely. I think it's the most fascinating book I have read in a very long time. So I'm going to get very nerdy about this. I've talked about this, I think, either in a previous episode offhandedly, or maybe just Matt and I talked about it before and after recording. It is a book that is essentially the history of ice, like not immigration, customs, and enforcement. It like ice
Oof.
cubes. It's just fascinating. It
Yeah,
I
yeah.
had never thought about things like how did the first ice from Boston make its way down to Cuba, and how do you sell ice to people who have never seen ice before? That's like I think one of the opening stories, or things like culture wise of the South is famous for sweet tea, but that only works because of ice. Things like cocktails in New Orleans, like how did they get ice in the
Yeah.
beginning? But then it's also super fascinating. And I think where I really enjoyed it was you could see a lot of like debates that we have at the same time now of, they talked about ice in the sense of machine made ice versus natural ice and which one is better for you, and should you be supporting your local iceman who carves ice out of the lake, or should you get with the times and do the automated ice? And it's just so fascinating
Interesting.
to think that we have the exact same conversations about
Yeah,
whether we should have automated stuff versus man-made stuff and things like that. So
sure.
absolutely fascinating book. I devoured it because it was so interesting.
Yeah. I'll gonna have my full summer reading list from our conversation
I'm
here.
gonna put that on the list. Like
No,
it's in that same space as the 50 inventions book.
yeah.
I remember just flying through it. I loved it so
Yeah, that'll
much.
be great. That'll be great. So I'll throw another book out, and I'll actually, I normally don't do this, but it's a book that I've not finished, but it's short stories, and I've done enough of it that I can at least recommend. And it's complete fiction, but man, the econ in here is already just fascinating.
Hmm.
And it's Table for Two. It's Amor Towles' new book, and Amor Towles is the Gentleman in Moscow and the Lincoln Highway author. And so this came out recently, and if you don't want spoilers, skip ahead about a minute because I'm just going to give a couple. But the first short story is set in Russia right after the revolution in the 19 teens, and a couple moves to Moscow, and the lady fits right in. She's like all with the revolution, and the guy
Hmm.
kind of is takes him a while to find his way, and he gets placed in a job, and he gets fired from the job. And he comes home, and this is one of the greatest quotes I've ever seen in a book. And it's, "How do you get fired from communism?" Like what a great line. But just fascinating stories that weave through. There's another on selling art and how, there's, it's not about how it's sold, but it's about artwork and collecting and all of the stuff. So there's certainly some econ references throughout. And I've enjoyed the previous work. So that's shorter stories if you're looking for a fiction book to
Man, now I
potentially add to your list.
feel like I should. Did you have a non-fiction, non-econ book? Or did you just have a econ book and
I
a
mean, Elon
fiction
Musk
book?
is not really an econ
Oh,
book.
that's right. Yep,
Yeah,
never mind.
yeah. So, but
Completely
it's
missed over that.
so I've kind of, I've thrown a few out there. The one that's more a little bit more econ with the Friedman biography, and then a
Hmm.
couple that are kind of econ-y. They have econ in them, but they're not really economics books, per
Oh,
se.
those sound great. So, Matt, you said you like to read on cruises. What are your do you have tips and tricks for people who want to start reading more other than go on a cruise? Like,
No, I wish I did. Don't work as much. Don't pick up a hobby that takes time, right? I wish I read a little bit more. I wish I put down the phone more, or put
mhm.
away the iPad and picked up a book a little bit more often. But I it's a tip. I'm not good at following it myself. So
My tip is always, and again, I'm gonna give this tip, and then I just want you to remember I have not been following it
yeah,
myself, because I am very far behind. But often, at least the advice that I used to give students was that if you read 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the evening, you can knock out a book a week. I'm not a fast reader, but 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes at night, I could probably get about 30 pages done. And if you could do 30 pages over 7 days, it's 210. It's not
yep,
exactly going to get you to a book, but maybe you get to have an extra hour on a Saturday or a Sunday.
yeah,
Um, I think 20 pages is I would say that I would say that's a slow rate if you're going to read. Uh,
sure, sure,
you can do 30
yeah.
minutes in the morning, 30 minutes at night,
Now,
but it's tough.
the only other tip that I would give, and part of how quote unquote read as much as I've read, is a lot of it's audiobooks.
Hmm.
And the audiobook through Kindle, you could have it on Audible and the Kindle, and it'll pick up right where you left off either way, which
Yeah.
is nice. Now, that's the downside is then you can't get the free ones through Libby because you can get a whole ton of audiobooks, or just ebooks delivered right to you from your library for free.
Hmm.
Can't do it to benefit for those, but
Matt, I'm gonna
any.
share.
Oh,
I'm
go
gonna
ahead.
share a podcast. Actually, this is good. Ask me what you're gonna ask me.
I was going to
I
ask
have it for
pop
you.
culture
Pop culture.
references.
I don't have a great pop culture one. I'm gonna phrase this into pop culture as in a TikTok that I saw that somebody shared with me. Jamie Wagner.
Yes.
Of
Yep.
Jamie Wagner.
No,
So
I've
Jamie
met Jamie. It's been a few years, but and then followed as go by Jay Wags, I
Jay
think, on some of
Wags.
the social
Yeah,
media, I
Professor
believe.
Wags.
Okay.
Um,
But no, it's been, gosh, it might even be since I've been dean, but
yeah.
probably at one of the C Tree conferences. Yep.
So Jamie shared this TikTok with me. Absolutely fascinating. It's a librarian on TikTok. Somebody had basically asked her a question like, why is it that when I want to request an ebook or an audiobook from the library, why do I have to wait when it's a digital copy? And so part of that argument, I think, we try to teach our students, economic way of thinking. I'm
Yep.
guilty of it where I say things like, look, marginal cost is zero to just send that book over to you. But basically, she goes through and talks about like the marginal cost is not zero for the library. She kind of goes through the pricing structure of how much libraries have to pay for ebooks and audiobooks. Whereas before they would buy a book, and I don't think a lot of people know this. Like when your local library buys a physical book, they don't pay the Barnes and Noble price. A library book costs them hundreds of dollars for the exact same book,
Hmm.
because the publisher wants to make right. They're not selling a book, so they need to make sure they get their money from book usage. But the same idea with an ebook. A lot of times libraries are charged. I think I'm going to butcher, but I'll put it in the Substack. Basically, libraries are charged like $1 or $2 every time somebody checks out a book. And they said one of the worst things that people do. So if this is you, please stop doing it. You're costing your local library lots of money. The worst thing that people do is they check out a book, they get to the end, they don't finish it, and they go renew the book. And then they let it sit in their account and they go renew the book.
Hmm.
And every time they're hitting renew the book, they're basically charging their local library $1 or $2, because the
Really?
library has to pay for each one. So that's why libraries cap you on how many ebooks you can get or audiobooks, is because they don't want you to just put 30 ebooks in your cart and never read them, because then it's going to cost them like $30 to do that. So Jamie shared that TikTok with me. I'm going to put that in the pop culture section just because it's a TikTok. But I thought it's really fascinating. I think it's really interesting. And it makes me definitely rethink how I do like Libby, ebooks, stuff like that, because I
Sure.
will admit that I'm also guilty of that.
Yeah. And I don't know that I have the greatest pop culture today, although books is in some ways pop culture. I will share the family. We're not going to do a big trip, so we did a very short getaway Friday night and Saturday to New York City to see a few shows. And we saw a play, and of course, there won't
Mm.
be any songs going up on Broadway Econ, but there's a play called The Patriots that talks about the oligarchs in Russia and Putin's rise to power. And ton of the it was absolutely fantastic, and also a ton of econ in there,
Mhm.
and kind of how those aren't free markets over there that were
Yeah.
the oligarchs were thriving in by any means. Those were not free markets, but pretty fascinating. I believe Netflix is a producer of the show of the play, which means Netflix owns the rights, and I think they are
Hmm.
planning to turn that into a Netflix movie as well, or
Interesting.
maybe a series. So that might be something to look out for in a year or so.
No, that's neat.
So, well, thank you. Did you finish your drink?
No, I have a little bit left, but it's sunny outside, so I think I will finish it.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I am on grilling duty tonight. So after we're done, I'm outside, and there might have to be maybe the non-alcoholic one for beer number two to try to keep to my damp 2024, which
I do need to cook, so maybe I'll step outside and finish this, and I'll go cook dinner too.
yeah, yeah. But thank you to everybody for listening. Our next episode should be live from Atlanta, which we don't know exactly yet the timing when we're talking, but by the time this drops, I hope we will, and I will be able to include a short extra segment that indicates where we'll be in case you'd like to swing by and catch a live recording of Economics Happy Hour. But until next time, cheers.
Cheers, Matt. Oh, I lost Matt. So Matt will hopefully come back in a second. So this is still recording, which is good. Matt has disappeared. Matt is no longer on this podcast with us. I am by myself. I am the captain now. And I'm really curious if when Matt goes to review this, if he will leave this part in here or if he will cut this out and let me just talk the entire time. Um, I don't even know where to go because like I feel like if he's going to leave this in here, I should just keep talking and then find out, oh, he's back now.